I want to invite you to today's message. What truly matters? What truly matters? I have a quick question that I want to start with this message. Have you ever chased after something, thinking it would make you happy, only to end up feeling kind of empty? I think all of us at one point began experience this question at one point. So before we go deeper, I want to share with you a quick story that a lot of us probably can relate to. When I was growing up, I kept hearing the messages from my parents, from the environment around me, to go to college, go find a stable job, make good money. That was the plan. According to my parents, my teachers, society, pretty much everyone around me. And honestly, I believed it. So for the first part of my life, that's exactly what I chased. A career, success. And I thought that was my purpose. I thought that was the goal that my life was focused on. But then something happened. I met Jesus, and that changed my life forever. Because for the first time, I realized that my purpose wasn't for getting a good career or climbing a ladder, but it was to worship God. It was to live a life that honored Him, to know Him, and to make Him known. And I'm telling you this because there's a big difference between what society is telling us and what God is telling us truly matters. The world tells us to chase status, but God tells us to chase after something else, something deeper, something eternal. So let me ask you, what are you chasing right now? Is it money? Is it recognition? Is it security? What are you hoping for that will make you fulfilled? The reason why I'm telling you this is because this is what Jesus is telling us exactly in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. To not store up your treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. Because where your treasure is, that's where your heart will also be. So here's the big question that I want all of us to focus on. What treasure are you really seeking? Where is your heart truly invested? Let's first look at Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21. It says, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." You know, Jesus isn't giving us financial advice here. He's digging something deeper, going straight for the heart. He knows that whatever our heart is, whatever what we treasure, that's what we end up steering our life. So when Jesus says store up, what this means in the original Greek language is that you're hoarding something, that you're piling up, you're stacking up something in life, something that we need to feel secured. But here's the problem. It's that everything that we try to hold on in life, money, fame, and anything else, even people's approval, is all fragile. Clothes, moths eat them up. Cars, tech, anything fancy, they rust. Money, someone can steal it. Or the value can disappear overnight. Basically, earthly treasures don't last. They're vulnerable and they fade. But Jesus tells us to store up treasures in heaven. What does that mean? It's things that matter to God. Acts of love, kindness, obedience, generosity, faithfulness. These are the things that last, things that don't decay because of time or the thieves can't touch. Jesus is teaching us a simple but powerful truth. What are you investing your time in? Whatever you invest in most reveals what you love the most. What you invest in the most is what reveals what you love the most. So whatever you're most passionate about, that's what your heart really is. Whatever you're passionate about, that's where your heart really is. There's a quote by a theologian named William Barclay, and he says, "A man's real God is what he counts as best and works hardest for." A man's real God is what he counts as best and works hardest for. That one hits, doesn't it? What you spend your life on and what you work your heart on, that is where your real God is. So yeah, worship. It's not just about showing up to church. It's not about just singing on Sundays, but it's about what you're giving your life to. What is your heart giving to? What gets your time, your energy, your thoughts, your money? That's what you're really worshiping in your life. And worship is not just about on Sundays, but worship in your daily life. What are you worshiping in your daily life? The whole thing goes back to the first commandment, that you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. It's not about statues or idols. It's anything that starts to own us. Anything that starts to own us. But here's the truth. That things aren't bad, but when they start owning us, that's when it becomes a problem. When things start owning us, that's when things become a problem. So let me ask you, what are you treasuring most right now? If you want to find out, look at what your calendar is focused on. Look at what your thoughts are focused on. When you daydream, when your mind wanders off, what is it focused on? Are you pouring your things into things that will outlive you or things that will rot, rust, or be replaced next year? Jesus isn't saying, don't be responsible. That's not what he's saying. He's just inviting us to change the direction of our investments towards eternity. Serving others, loving people well, living generously, pursuing holiness. These are the kind of treasures that never lose value. So don't just ask, what can I get out of this life? But ask yourself, what can I do for the world? but what can I do in my life within Christ? That is where your purpose is found. And that's how we start investing in things that last long for God's kingdom. So the second part that we can look at is that the eye is the lamp, and it provides clarity of vision. So if you look at Matthew chapter 6, verse 22 through 23, it says, the eye is the lamp of the body. Where your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be filled of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? If your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is the darkness? Back in ancient times, people believed that the eye was like a window. It's what let light into your whole body. So that's how we see things, right? We see our eye receives the light and we see everything in front of us. He's really talking about our focus, our inner vision. What are we looking at? What are we looking at? What are we chasing? Jesus says, if your eye is healthy, and the word he uses, it just doesn't mean like physically looking, but it means clear, single, undivided attention focused on thing that is in front of you. It even has the sense of being sincere, being generous. And so what does that mean for us? Jesus talks about the bad eye. And he talks about the healthy eye. A healthy eye is more than just the eyesight that we gain. It means having a heart. It means having a life that's locked in on God. You know, we use this phrase a lot, lock in. Because when you lock in something, your whole life is focused on that. Your time, your energy, your resources is focused on what you're locked in. And so when you're locked in, you're not spiritually cross-eyed. But when you're locked in on Jesus, not one eye on the world, but when your eye is focused on Jesus, you're focused, you're wholehearted, you're clear. But then Jesus talks about the bad eye. So there's the healthy eye, and then there's the bad eye. The bad eye is what causes the weight of greed, selfishness, and envy. It's when your focus gets blurry. You're chasing attention, stuff, and validation. When your eye is actually darkness, that darkness runs deep. Just as it said in the last part of verse 23, how deep is that darkness? This wasn't just a random metaphor. In Jewish culture, to have a good eye meant that you were generous and you were kind. A bad eye meant that you were stingy, self-focused. Jesus was pulling from something his listeners would totally understand. And he wasn't just talking about giving. He was talking about our whole orientation, our whole heart. And if you look at the whole passage, you'll see that Jesus isn't jumping around from one passage to another. This part about the eye, it connects deeply to the topic of heart and treasure. He says, what we treasure affects our focus. And what we focus on, this shapes our whole life. What we focus on shapes our whole life. So here's a tough but honest question we ask ourselves. What's dominating our mental space every day? What's dominating our mental space? Are your thoughts pulled on stuff, towards stuff that fades away, or are you focused on things that actually last for eternity? Is your mind so cluttered with comparison, goals, and distractions that it's blurring your vision on God? Because let's be real, we live in a world that's constantly trying to hijack our attention. Every detail, every ad, every notification is screaming, look at this, care about this, do you want this? But Jesus, he's inviting us to focus and clear our vision, to fix our gaze on something that won't disappoint. So when your focus is set on God, when we seek his kingdom with an undivided heart, that's when our whole life lights up. Our choices, our mindsets, our values become clear. Because when the eye is healthy, the whole body is full of light. Next, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, it focuses on God or wealth. So this is a verse that a lot of us have come across at one point. It says, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So now Jesus brings it all home. He says the focus, treasure, is the focus. And now, who do we serve? He's not just wrapping things up, but he's giving us a reality check. Jesus says, you can't serve two masters. And the word he uses for serve, it's not a casual, it means bond slave, total, all in. You're all in. You're all in. Not part-time loyalty, not a Sunday morning faith, but you are all in, focused on God and Jesus. It's about who owns your heart. Who owns my heart? And here's what's wild is that Jesus doesn't say it's hard to serve both God and money. He says it's impossible. It's impossible. One will always ending up calling the shots. So you will either love money or you will either love God. Let's be honest, money is more than paper. It's a rival. It promises you safety. It whispers, if you had just more, you'll finally feel served, respected. But here's the catch that money always takes more than it gives. It is never enough. But God invites us to trust him as our provider, our identity, our peace. When you seek him first, all these things will be given to you. There's a promise that Jesus reminds us in the last part of chapter 6. That everything you need, not everything you want, but everything that matters will be given to you, but if you first seek his kingdom and righteousness. But you got to also remember that the Bible doesn't say that wealth is evil. It just says it's dangerous when it becomes the thing that you love most. Only when it becomes the thing that you love most. Because think about the rich young ruler in Matthew chapter 19. He wanted to follow Jesus, but he just couldn't let go of all the stuff that he had. He was a wealthy young man. And that's the story of so many people today. So let's pause and get honest here. Who or what do I really serve? When I make a decision, am I thinking, what honors God? Or is my default, what boosts my life? When money and faith put us and pull us in different directions, which way will you obey? This is the moment to stop straddling the line because you can't live in both kingdoms. He says to pick what is the truth. And here's the beautiful truth that Freedom doesn't come from having everything. It comes from being in Christ and being fully His. When we serve God with undivided loyalty, we don't become poor. We become rich in peace, in purpose, in joy, and in things that last forever. So we see finally, once again, He reminds us in Matthew chapter 6, verse 20. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves don't break in and steal. Here's the amazing part, that Jesus doesn't tell us what not to chase. He shows us something better. He says, invest in treasures in heaven. Why? Because treasures in heaven are untouchable. They don't wear out. They don't lose value. No one can steal them. And they're tied to God's eternal purpose. So they're secured forever. Now, let's be clear. He's not talking about the gold bars stopped in some vault in the sky. He's talking about eternal impact. Treasures in heaven are the fruit of a life aligned with God. And this looks like loving when it costs you, serving when no one's watching, giving so others can hear the gospel, enduring in faith when life is hard, choosing obedience, even when it's uncomfortable. That's the eternal currency that we're getting. And Jesus reminds us that you'll never regret investing in God's kingdom. Sure, earthly rewards feel good now, but eternal rewards, they outlast everything. And that's what Paul reminds us too in 1 Timothy verse 6, 18 through 19. Paul says it is beautifully in this scripture. He says, tell them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up treasures for the future as a foundation for the coming age. Amen. That's how heaven's economy works. It's about faith, hope, and love. These are the investments that stand the test of time. So what does that look like today, this week, or this year? It means investing in people. It means encouraging someone who's tired, pouring out into the next generation, sharing Jesus with someone who's searching. These things may seem small, they may go unnoticed, but in God's eyes, nothing done in faith is ever wasted. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10, that if you're given a cup of cold water to someone in my name, you won't lose your reward. So here's where it all comes together. What we treasure shapes what we focus. What we focus shapes who we serve. And who we serve shapes everything else. When your heart is aligned with heaven, your treasures will follow. Your decisions will shift. Your priorities will make sense. And your life, your whole life, will be filled with light. Don't live for what fades. Live for what lasts. Let's store up treasure where it truly counts. Let's live for what really matters. Let's all be in for the kingdom. We talked about treasure. We talked about focus. We talked about masters. We talked about the differences in between what fades and what lasts. At the end of the day, here's what it all comes down. Do you love Jesus? That's essentially the main question that we are left with when we focus on what truly matters. Not just in theory, not just when it's convenient, but with your heart, with your choices, your attention, and your life. Do you love Jesus? Because that's what truly matters. When you love him, you will want to treasure what he treasures. You want to focus on what he says is worth your time. You'll want to serve him, not only because you have to, but because you get to. Loving Jesus realigns everything. It frees us from the pressure of performing. It loosens the grip of materialism. It clears out our vision. It anchors our hearts in something that's eternal. So today, if you're feeling pulled in every direction, if you're tired of chasing things that don't satisfy, come back to this simple but powerful question. Do I love Jesus? Because when the answer is yes, that is when you will start living for what truly matters. When you say yes, that's when you start living for what truly matters. Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Let us pray.